Now, the poem you just saw was composed during my recent stay in rehab. And I was in rehab due to drinking and drugs. I came to a point in my life where I realized that I needed help and I could not do it myself. I was struggling and I needed assistance. So I went into rehab, and while I was there, it was a very valuable experience because it allowed me to analyze myself and get to the true meaning of who I was. For a long time, I didn't know the answer to the question, who is John? Rehab allowed me to take away all those layers and walls that I had built around myself. And during that 6-month stay in rehab is when I composed that poem. Now let's talk about some of the imagery you saw. The tree represents family. And by family, I don't just mean my parents, I mean the community to which I belonged. The group of people that gave me roots and that gave me strength and that helped me have a good, healthy, natural life. The river, on the other hand, represented, well, drinking and drugs and the friends involved in that lifestyle. It also represented peer pressure. You know, those people would say, "Hey, John, come along and party with us." And for a while, I was okay with saying no. But then, after a time, peer pressure got the better of me. And soon enough, I was convinced. So I ended up leaving my family, that community. That leaf represents me. And I started floating along the river of drinking and drugs. And I've got to be honest with you, for a while, it was fun. Drinking and drugs were awesome. I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed myself. Life was one big party. I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is the life. This is awesome. Until it became apparent that I hadn't been realizing that I was no longer in control. I was being swept along. And it was hard to get out of that lifestyle. And I realized I needed help. But I stayed in it. No matter how hard I tried to get out, I couldn't. Do you remember in the poem, the leaf being swept down to the bottom of the river? That was me almost hitting rock bottom. But nobody helped me. I was being carried along. And eventually, you remember in the poem, the branch that was reaching down into the water? I did stop for a little while. That branch represents my family, who saw that I was in trouble and reached out to try to save me. But those friends did not. They ignored my need. They were just as swept up in the lifestyle as I was, and they wanted me to keep going along with them. So that current kept sweeping against me, and I failed. That was when I relapsed again. And I kept moving along with that current until I noticed drawing ever nearer was death. The waterfall represents death. I knew that if I kept going, my life would be finished. I couldn't continue living in that lifestyle. I knew myself, and I knew I couldn't do it, so I eventually accepted my own death. And I knew as I was swept over that waterfall that my life was over. But the wind in the poem that picked that leaf up and blew it to safety and onto dry land, that wind represents my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law recognized that I was ready to end my own life. She was the one who saw what was going on and who helped pull me out of drinking and drugs and get me into the hospital. My sister-in-law saved my life. In the poem, the leaf lands on solid ground, but you may notice that it still flutters and struggles a little bit. And I put that in the poem to tell you that I am not completely recovered. I will always be recovering. I will continue to work because I realize that I'm fragile. But what I know is important is that I've got a system. I've got support. I've got friends and family around me who will never let me stop struggling until the end of my days. Now, I'd like to say that my experiences in drinking and drugs were absolutely not worth it. For some people, that's okay. For some people, that's not. For me, it was not. So I want to tell you, say no to drugs. Don't fall into the traps of alcohol. Think for yourself. Think about who owns you. You do. Don't allow peer pressure to work against you.